Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in Atlanta history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know to what places and at what moments of day or night these documented accounts reach. In 1848, Atlanta was a growing railroad hub in the heart of Georgia, where the smoke from locomotives mixed with the dust of construction and the weight of an institution that would soon tear the nation apart. Among the families who built their fortunes on cotton and human bondage was the Hargrove household, led by plantation owner William Hargrove and his wife Eleanor. Their property sat on what is now the outskirts of modern Atlanta, but in those days was considered prime farmland surrounded by dense Georgia pine forests. The Hargroves owned 43 enslaved people, according to the 1848 census records found in the Fulton County archives. Among them was a man listed simply as Nathan, approximately 28 years old, described in the household inventory as a field hand of exceptional strength and reliability. What made Nathan's case unusual was not his circumstances as an enslaved person, tragic as they were, but rather what happened to the records of his existence and the strange events that followed his documented disappearance from the plantation rolls. According to surviving correspondence between Eleanor Hargrove and her sister Margaret, dated March of 1848, Nathan had been purchased from an estate sale in Savannah the previous winter. The letters, discovered in 1962 during the demolition of an old mansion in Virginia Highland, paint a picture of a man who was literate, which was both unusual and potentially dangerous for enslaved people of that era. Eleanor wrote that Nathan could read scripture and had been observed writing in what appeared to be a personal journal using charcoal and bark strips. The first sign that something was amiss came in April of 1848, when the overseer, a man named Thomas Crawford, noted in his daily reports that Nathan had failed to appear for morning work assignments 3 consecutive days. Crawford's logs, preserved in the Atlanta Historical Society archives, show that Nathan was not recorded as sick, injured, or disciplined. He simply was not present, yet no formal search was initiated. What makes this absence particularly strange is that running away was typically met with immediate pursuit, harsh punishment, and detailed documentation. The absence of any such records suggests either remarkable negligence on the part of the plantation management or something else entirely. William Hargrove's personal diary entries from that period, discovered in 1959 in a trunk in the basement of what was once the Hargrove property, make no mention of Nathan's disappearance, despite Crawford's reports. The overseer's frustration is evident in his increasingly terse notes. By the end of April, Crawford had stopped listing Nathan among the field hands entirely, yet there was no corresponding entry indicating death, sale, or escape. It was as if Nathan had simply been erased from the plantation's memory. This administrative peculiarity would later become the central mystery that drew researchers to the case more than a century later. During this same period, Eleanor Hargrove's letters to her sister began to take on a different tone. Where previous correspondence focused on social events and household management, her April letters contained cryptic references to disturbed sleep and strange sounds coming from what she described as the old quarters. She wrote of hearing what sounded like scratching coming from beneath the floorboards of the main house late at night, sounds that seemed to move from room to room. The Hargrove plantation employed several house servants who lived in quarters closer to the main residence. Among these was a woman named Ruth, who, according to Eleanor's letters, had become increasingly withdrawn and refused to enter certain areas of the house after dark. Ruth's behavior was noted by Eleanor as highly unusual, given that house servants typically worked well into the evening hours, preparing meals and maintaining the residence. In May of 1848, William Hargrove made an unexpected decision to travel to Charleston on business, leaving Eleanor to manage the household. His departure was sudden enough that Crawford noted it in his logs as disruptive to plantation operations. William's own diary entries from this period, written during his stay in Charleston, reveal a man grappling with unnamed concerns. He wrote of sleepless nights and a desire to remain away from the plantation longer than originally planned. While William was away, Eleanor documented in her letters what she called unusual discoveries around the property. Workers clearing brush from a section of woodland found what appeared to be a small underground chamber, possibly used for storage. The chamber contained personal items that Eleanor could not identify, including what she described as pieces of bark, with markings that resembled letters or symbols. These items were collected, but their ultimate fate is unknown. The summer of 1848 brought increased tension throughout Georgia as debates over slavery and states' rights intensified. For the Hargrove family, however, the tension seemed more personal and immediate. Eleanor's letters from June describe a household staff that had become increasingly difficult to manage. Several house servants requested reassignment to fieldwork, an unusual request given that house positions were typically considered preferable. Ruth, the house servant who had exhibited strange behavior earlier, had apparently begun speaking of dreams that kept her awake. Eleanor wrote that Ruth claimed to hear voices calling from beneath the ground, voices that spoke of injustices that demanded acknowledgement. While such beliefs might have been dismissed as superstition, Eleanor noted that Ruth's descriptions contained details about the plantation's layout and history that she should not have known. By July, the administrative confusion surrounding Nathan's status had created practical problems for plantation operations. Crawford's logs show repeated requests for clarification about work assignments and rations. The number of field hands listed in daily reports did not match the official plantation roster, creating discrepancies that worried Crawford from both operational and legal perspectives. It was during this period that Eleanor made a discovery that would haunt her for the remainder of the summer. While organizing storage areas in the main house, she found what appeared to be pages from a journal hidden beneath loose floorboards in what had been Nathan's assigned sleeping area when he occasionally worked late in the house. The pages, written in careful script, contained observations about the daily life of the plantation from the perspective of someone who could see and record details that others missed or chose to ignore. The journal pages, according to Eleanor's description in letters to her sister, contained not accusations or anger, but rather detailed observations about the routines and relationships within the plantation community. There were notes about which families had been separated, which individuals showed signs of illness or injury, and which seemed to carry burdens beyond the physical demands of their labor. The writing suggested someone who watched carefully and remembered everything. Eleanor's decision about what to do with these pages created what she described as the most difficult moral dilemma of her life. Her letters indicate that she understood the potential consequences of acknowledging the existence of such documentation, both for herself and for others mentioned in the writings. Yet she also recognized that destroying the pages would eliminate the only record of observations that someone had considered important enough to risk severe punishment to document. William's return from Charleston in August coincided with increased attention from neighboring plantation owners who had heard rumors about problems with the Hargrove workforce. The community of plantation owners maintained informal networks for sharing information about potential runaways, labor unrest, and other security concerns. The fact that Nathan's disappearance had not been reported through these channels had begun to attract questions. Crawford's logs from August show increased pressure from William to provide detailed accounting of all plantation resources, including complete rosters of enslaved people. The overseer's notes reveal frustration with what he called inconsistencies in record-keeping that had accumulated over the summer months. His attempts to reconcile the numbers consistently came up short, with Nathan's status remaining an unexplained gap in the documentation. During a community gathering in late August, according to Eleanor's letters, several neighboring wives asked directly about rumors concerning missing people from the Hargrove plantation. Eleanor wrote that she found herself unable to provide satisfactory answers, not because she was intentionally deceptive, but because she genuinely did not understand what had happened or how to explain the administrative confusion that had developed. The pressure of maintaining social relationships while harboring unexplained doubts about her own household began to affect Eleanor's health. Her letters from September describe headaches and difficulty sleeping. She wrote of feeling watched, though she could never identify the source of her discomfort. The house itself seemed different to her, as if familiar spaces had taken on new meanings that she could not quite understand. Ruth's behavior continued to deteriorate throughout the autumn months. Eleanor's letters indicate that the house servant had begun refusing to work alone in any area of the main house and would not remain on the property after sunset. Her requests to be reassigned to field work were repeatedly denied, as trained house servants were too valuable to reassign based on what was perceived as unreasonable fears. In October of 1848, William made a decision that surprised both Eleanor and Crawford. He announced plans to sell a portion of the plantation's workforce to a buyer in Alabama. This decision was unusual, given the approaching winter season and the typically stable nature of the Hargrove workforce. The planned sale included several long-time residents of the plantation, people who had established relationships and routines that typically discouraged such disruptions. Eleanor's letters reveal her confusion about the sudden decision to sell. William provided no clear explanation beyond citing economic pressures, though the plantation's financial records from that period, examined by researchers in 1963, show no evidence of unusual financial stress. The decision seemed driven by factors that William chose not to discuss with his wife or document in his personal writings. The preparation for the workforce sale required detailed documentation of each person being transferred, creating additional pressure on Crawford to reconcile his records. His logs from this period show increasing frustration with discrepancies that could not be explained through normal record-keeping errors. The gap where Nathan should have appeared in the documentation had become a problem that could not be easily resolved or ignored. As autumn progressed into winter, Eleanor's letters describe a household atmosphere that had become increasingly tense. The planned sale had created uncertainty among all the enslaved people on the plantation, as rumors spread about who might be included and what such transfers meant for established family relationships. The stress affected both fieldwork and house operations, creating additional challenges for management. Ruth's situation reached a crisis point in November when she collapsed during her duties and had to be carried to the quarters by other house servants. Eleanor's letters describe Ruth as speaking incoherently about voices from beneath the ground that demanded justice for forgotten wrongs. While such episodes might have been attributed to illness or exhaustion, Eleanor noted that Ruth's words contained specific details about events and people that she should not have known about. The community's attention to the Hargrove plantation increased when Ruth's condition became known through the informal networks that connected enslaved communities across multiple properties. Eleanor's correspondence with her sister reveals growing awareness that the problems at the plantation were becoming a subject of discussion among people beyond her immediate household. In December of 1848, a development occurred that would later be considered the most significant event in the entire mystery. During routine maintenance work on the main house, workers discovered what appeared to be additional hidden chambers beneath sections of the structure. These spaces were more extensive than the earlier discovery in the woodland and contained personal items, documentation, and evidence of regular use over an extended period. Eleanor's description of this discovery, contained in letters that would not be found until 1961, reveals the extent of her shock and confusion. The hidden spaces contained not just personal belongings, but what appeared to be a complete record-keeping system that paralleled the official plantation documentation. The records were detailed, accurate, and maintained in careful handwriting that Eleanor recognized as similar to the journal pages she had found earlier. The unofficial records contained information about every person on the plantation, including details about health conditions, family relationships, and individual circumstances that were not reflected in the official documentation maintained by Crawford. Most disturbing to Eleanor was the realization that these records were more complete and accurate than the official documentation, suggesting that whoever maintained them had access to information and perspectives that the plantation management lacked. William's reaction to the discovery of the hidden chambers was swift and decisive. According to Eleanor's letters, he ordered the spaces sealed and forbade any discussion of their contents. The unofficial records were collected and, according to Eleanor's account, destroyed. Workers involved in the discovery were reassigned to other duties and instructed not to speak about what they had found. The sealing of the hidden chambers and destruction of the unofficial records did not end the strange occurrences at the plantation. Eleanor's letters from early 1849 describe continued reports of unusual sounds, particularly scratching and movement that seemed to come from beneath the main house. These sounds were reported by multiple household members and occurred frequently enough to disrupt normal routines. Ruth's condition had stabilized somewhat after the discovery and sealing of the hidden chambers, but she continued to refuse certain duties and maintained that she could hear voices that others could not. Eleanor noted that Ruth's behavior had influenced other house servants, creating an atmosphere of unease that affected the efficiency of household operations. The sale of plantation workers that had been planned for the autumn was delayed multiple times due to complications in the documentation process. Crawford's difficulty in reconciling his records had created legal concerns about clear title transfer for some individuals. The delays frustrated potential buyers and created additional scrutiny of the plantation's record-keeping practices. By spring of 1849, the administrative problems surrounding the missing documentation for Nathan and the discrepancies in plantation records had attracted attention from county officials. Routine inspections revealed gaps in required reporting that could not be easily explained. While such problems were not uncommon, the extent of the discrepancies at the Hargrove plantation was unusual enough to warrant formal inquiry. Eleanor's health continued to decline throughout the spring months. Her letters described persistent headaches, difficulty sleeping, and a general sense of unease that she could not attribute to any specific cause. She wrote of feeling that the house itself had changed, that familiar rooms held secrets that made her uncomfortable. The weight of unexplained events and hidden knowledge had begun to affect her ability to maintain normal social relationships. The formal inquiry into the plantation's records revealed administrative irregularities that required explanation. Crawford's logs showed consistent discrepancies over several months, and the inability to account for Nathan's status had become a documented problem that could not be ignored. William's personal involvement in addressing these issues was noted by county officials as unusual for a plantation owner who typically delegated such matters to his overseer. In June of 1849, Ruth made a request that surprised everyone in the household. She asked to be allowed to speak privately with Eleanor about events that she claimed were important for the family to understand. Eleanor's initial response was to dismiss the request, but Ruth's persistence and the deteriorating atmosphere in the household eventually led Eleanor to agree to the conversation. Eleanor's account of her conversation with Ruth, preserved in letters to her sister, describes revelations that challenged everything she thought she understood about her own household. Ruth claimed to have knowledge about the hidden chambers and their contents that went beyond what she could have observed during the discovery. She spoke of conversations with Nathan that had occurred after his official disappearance from plantation records. According to Ruth's account, Nathan had not fled the plantation as might have been assumed. Instead, he had been living in the hidden chambers beneath the main house, maintaining the unofficial records and observing the daily operations of the plantation from a perspective that allowed him to document details that others missed. Ruth claimed that she had been providing him with food and information, and that other house servants had been aware of his presence without acknowledging it openly. Eleanor's reaction to Ruth's revelations was complicated by her recognition that many of the details Ruth provided corresponded to unexplained events and discoveries that had occurred over the previous year. The account explained the scratching sounds, the accurate unofficial records, and the source of Ruth's detailed knowledge about plantation operations. It also suggested that the hidden chambers had been used for purposes that went far beyond simple storage. The implications of Ruth's account were disturbing not only for what they revealed about the plantation's operations, but also for what they suggested about the network of relationships and communication that existed beneath the surface of official plantation management. Eleanor realized that the enslaved community had maintained information systems and support networks that plantation owners and overseers had failed to recognize or understand. William's response to Eleanor's decision to listen to Ruth's account was immediate and harsh. He ordered Ruth's immediate sale to a buyer in Mississippi. Despite Eleanor's protests about the disruption such a transfer would cause, the sale was completed within days before Eleanor could find alternative solutions or negotiate different arrangements. Ruth's departure from the plantation marked the end of Eleanor's direct access to information about the hidden activities that had been occurring in her own household. Following Ruth's departure, the atmosphere in the main house changed dramatically. The scratching sounds that had been reported for months ceased entirely, and the sense of hidden observation that had made Eleanor uncomfortable seemed to dissipate. The return to apparent normalcy, however, created new anxieties for Eleanor, who realized that the absence of unusual events might mean that she had lost her only connection to understanding what had really been happening. Crawford's logs from the summer of 1849 show improved record-keeping and resolution of most administrative discrepancies. The gap in documentation surrounding Nathan's status was addressed by listing him as deceased. Though no death certificate or burial record was filed, the notation allowed the plantation's official records to balance properly and satisfied county officials who had been monitoring the situation. Eleanor's letters from this period reveal her struggle to accept the official resolution of problems that she knew had more complex explanations. The administrative convenience of declaring Nathan deceased solved the documentation problems, but did not address Eleanor's knowledge about the hidden chambers, the unofficial records, or Ruth's revelations about ongoing activities that had been concealed from plantation management. The question of what happened to Nathan after the hidden chambers were sealed and the unofficial records destroyed remained unanswered. Eleanor's letters suggest that she suspected he might have fled the plantation after his hiding place was discovered, but she had no direct evidence to support this theory. The alternative possibilities were too disturbing for her to document explicitly, even in private correspondence with her sister. As 1849 progressed toward autumn, Eleanor's health problems intensified. Her letters describe episodes of severe headaches and periods of disorientation that interfered with her ability to manage household duties. William arranged for her to spend extended periods visiting relatives in Savannah, separating her from the plantation environment that seemed to worsen her condition. During Eleanor's absences, William made additional changes to the plantation operations. Several long-term house servants were reassigned to field work, and new workers were brought in to handle domestic duties. These changes effectively eliminated most of the people who might have had knowledge about the hidden chambers or the network of communication that Ruth had described. Crawford's position as overseer was also affected by the events of the previous year. While he retained his official duties, William took on more direct involvement in daily operations, particularly regarding matters that involved record-keeping and communication with county officials. The changes suggested William's recognition that the administrative problems had exposed vulnerabilities in the plantation's management structure. In winter of 1849, Eleanor received a letter that would prove to be the last direct connection to the mystery of Nathan's disappearance. The letter was delivered by a traveling preacher who claimed to have been asked to carry it by a man who matched Nathan's description. The preacher could provide no additional information about the sender, saying only that he had been approached by someone who could read and write, and who asked that the letter be delivered discreetly. The letter itself was brief and contained no explicit references to specific events or people. It consisted mainly of biblical passages about justice and remembrance, copied in handwriting that Eleanor recognized as similar to the journal pages and unofficial records that had been found in the hidden chambers. The letter was signed only with initials that could have corresponded to Nathan's name, but provided no clear identification of the sender. Eleanor's decision about how to respond to the letter created another crisis of conscience. Acknowledging receipt of such correspondence could implicate her in communication with a fugitive, if Nathan had indeed fled the plantation. Ignoring the letter, however, would mean abandoning what might be her last opportunity to understand the truth about events that had disrupted her household and affected her health. After weeks of deliberation, Eleanor chose to respond through the same preacher, who was expected to return through the area in the spring. Her response was carefully worded to avoid explicit acknowledgement of the sender's identity, while expressing her hope that anyone who had suffered injustice would find peace and safety. The exchange represented Eleanor's attempt to address her moral obligations without creating legal or social complications for herself or her family. The preacher's return visit in spring of 1850 provided closure of a sort to Eleanor's connection with the mystery. He reported that he had been unable to deliver Eleanor's response because the person who had asked him to carry the original letter could not be located. The preacher had made inquiries in communities throughout northern Georgia, but found no trace of anyone matching the description of the person who had approached him. Eleanor's final letters about the events at the plantation, written in 1850, describe her acceptance that some questions would remain unanswered. The administrative resolution of the documentation problems had satisfied official requirements, but the deeper questions about hidden activities, unofficial networks, and individual fates had no clear answers. Eleanor's health had improved following her extended stays away from the plantation, but she never again felt entirely comfortable in the main house. The Hargrove plantation continued operations through the 1850s, though with significant changes in management structure and workforce composition. William's increased direct involvement in daily operations prevented the kind of administrative confusion that had characterized 1848. But it also eliminated much of the informal autonomy that had allowed hidden activities to develop. Eleanor's later correspondence, extending into the 1860s, occasionally referenced the events of 1848, but provided no additional information about unresolved questions. Her focus shifted to family matters and social obligations, suggesting her decision to accept the limits of what could be known about her household's hidden history. The physical evidence of the hidden chambers beneath the main house was eliminated during renovations completed in 1851. William's decision to undertake extensive reconstruction of the house's foundation effectively erased any remaining traces of the spaces that had concealed Nathan's presence and the unofficial record-keeping system that had documented details invisible to plantation management. County records from the 1850s show that the administrative irregularities at the Hargrove plantation were resolved to the satisfaction of local officials. The documentation problems that had attracted attention in 1849 were not repeated, and the plantation's official records maintained the standards expected for properties of its size and complexity. When the Civil War began in 1861, the Hargrove plantation, like others throughout Georgia, faced disruptions that made the problems of 1848 seem minor by comparison. The larger questions about slavery, freedom, and justice that had been implicit in Nathan's story became explicit issues that could no longer be contained within individual households or resolved through administrative adjustments. Eleanor Hargrove died in 1863 during the height of the war's impact on Georgia. Her personal papers, including the correspondence that documented her experience with the plantation's hidden history, were preserved by family members but not examined by researchers until nearly a century later. The delayed discovery of these materials meant that the full scope of the mystery did not become apparent until long after all direct witnesses had died. William Hargrove survived the war, but lost the plantation to economic pressures during Reconstruction. He died in 1872 in Atlanta, leaving behind business records and personal writings that contain no references to the events of 1848 or the unresolved questions about Nathan's fate. His silence on these matters was complete and apparently deliberate. Crawford, the overseer whose careful logs had documented the administrative confusion surrounding Nathan's disappearance, left Georgia after the war and settled in Texas. His subsequent career involved managing agricultural operations for several different employers, but none of his later records reference the unusual problems he had encountered at the Hargrove plantation. The site of the original Hargrove plantation was developed for residential and commercial use during Atlanta's post-war expansion. By the early 1900s, no visible traces of the original structures remained, and the location of the main house where the hidden chambers had been discovered was lost to urban development. Interest in the Nathan Hargrove case began in 1957, when a graduate student at Emory University encountered references to the administrative irregularities in county records while researching plantation management practices. The student, Margaret Collins, was initially interested in the case as an example of record-keeping problems, but her research revealed the existence of Eleanor's correspondence and other materials that suggested more complex explanations. Collins's initial research paper, completed in 1958, focused on the administrative aspects of the case and did not explore the more disturbing implications of Eleanor's letters or Ruth's revelations about hidden activities. The academic approach treated the missing documentation as a problem of management efficiency rather than evidence of concealed human drama. Further research by Collins and other scholars through the early 1960s gradually revealed the full scope of the materials available for study. The discovery of Eleanor's complete correspondence with her sister in 1961 provided the most detailed account of events from the perspective of someone who had lived through them and struggled to understand their implications. The examination of Crawford's logs in 1962 added the administrative perspective to the story and confirmed many of the details described in Eleanor's letters. The correlation between these independent sources of information provided researchers with confidence that the documented events had actually occurred as described, even when their implications remained unclear. Additional materials discovered during the 1960s included fragments of county records that had been misfiled or overlooked in previous research. These documents provided context for understanding the legal and social pressures that had influenced responses to the administrative problems at the Hargrove plantation. The most significant discovery occurred in 1964, when construction workers renovating a building in downtown Atlanta found a collection of papers that had been walled up during 19th century modifications to the structure. Among these papers were documents that appeared to be related to the unofficial record-keeping system that Eleanor had described finding in the hidden chambers. The documents found in 1964 included detailed notes about individuals and families associated with multiple plantations throughout the Atlanta area. The information was far more comprehensive than typical plantation records and suggested an organized effort to document conditions and relationships from perspectives not reflected in official management documentation. Handwriting analysis conducted in 1965 established strong similarities between the documents found in downtown Atlanta and samples of writing attributed to Nathan in Eleanor's correspondence. While definitive identification was not possible due to limited comparison materials, the analysis supported the theory that Nathan had been involved in maintaining comprehensive, unofficial records about enslaved communities. The discovery of the downtown Atlanta documents raised new questions about the scope of hidden activities that might have been occurring on plantations throughout the region. The comprehensive nature of the information suggested coordination between individuals on multiple properties and challenged assumptions about the isolation and limited communication that plantation management systems were designed to maintain. Research conducted through the mid-1960s revealed additional cases of documentation, irregularities, and unexplained disappearances from plantation records throughout Georgia during the 1840s and 50s. While none of these cases were as thoroughly documented as the Nathan Hargrove situation, the patterns suggested that hidden networks and concealed activities might have been more widespread than previously recognized. The implications of this broader research extended beyond historical curiosity to challenge conventional understanding of how plantation systems actually functioned. The evidence suggested that enslaved communities had developed sophisticated information systems and support networks that operated beneath the awareness of plantation management and official oversight. Margaret Collins completed her doctoral dissertation on the Nathan Hargrove case in 1966, providing the most comprehensive academic analysis of the available materials. Her work established the case as a significant example of hidden resistance and community organization within the slave system, while acknowledging that key questions about individual fates and specific activities remained unanswered. Collins's research attracted attention from other scholars studying resistance and community formation in enslaved populations. The Nathan Hargrove case became a reference point for understanding how hidden activities could develop and persist within plantation environments that appeared to be under complete management control. Public interest in the case increased following the publication of Collins' dissertation and subsequent academic articles. The story's combination of mystery, human drama, and historical significance appealed to audiences beyond academic circles and generated requests for additional research and documentation. However, by the late 1960s, the physical evidence available for further research had been largely exhausted. The original plantation site had been completely developed, the participants had died decades earlier, and the documentary materials discovered during the 1950s and 60s represented the complete surviving record of events. The question of Nathan's ultimate fate remained the most compelling unresolved aspect of the case. The evidence suggested multiple possibilities: successful escape to freedom, continued hidden residence in the Atlanta area, or a more tragic conclusion that had been concealed by those involved. Eleanor's letters and other contemporary materials provided no definitive answers to these possibilities. Ruth's fate after her sail to Mississippi was another unresolved element of the story. Attempts to trace her subsequent history through plantation records in Mississippi and other states produced no reliable information. Her disappearance into the anonymous masses of enslaved people transferred during the pre-war period represented the typical loss of individual identity that characterized the slave system. The network of communication and support that Ruth had described remained largely invisible in the historical record. While the evidence suggested that such networks existed and played important roles in enslaved communities, their secretive nature meant that they left few traces that could be documented through conventional research methods. Modern historians have continued to study the Nathan Hargrove case as part of broader research into resistance, community formation, and hidden activities in slave societies. The case provides valuable insights into how enslaved people created and maintained agency and communication within systems designed to eliminate such possibilities. The story also illustrates the limitations of historical research when dealing with events that were deliberately concealed from official documentation. The gaps and uncertainties in the Nathan Hargrove case reflect the broader challenges of recovering the experiences and perspectives of people whose lives were intentionally rendered invisible by the legal and social systems of their time. Contemporary discussions of the case often focus on its implications for understanding the complexity of relationships and power dynamics within plantation systems. Eleanor's struggle to comprehend and respond to hidden activities in her own household illustrates how even those who held official authority could be unaware of the fuller reality of their circumstances. The case has also been cited in discussions about the recovery and preservation of African American historical experiences that were excluded from conventional documentation. The unofficial records that Nathan apparently maintained represent attempts to create alternative forms of historical memory that could preserve information overlooked or distorted by official sources. Educational programs and historical presentations about the Nathan Hargrove case emphasize both the human drama of individual experiences and the broader historical significance of hidden resistance and community organization. The story provides concrete examples of how abstract historical forces affected real people and families. The physical locations associated with the story have become points of interest for those studying Atlanta's development and the transformation of landscapes that once supported plantation agriculture. While no visible traces of the original structures remain, the general area continues to draw researchers and visitors interested in connecting with this chapter of the city's history. Archive preservation efforts have focused on maintaining access to the documentary materials that make study of the case possible. The letters, logs, and official records that document the events have been digitized and made available to researchers, ensuring that future scholars will have access to the same materials that enabled the original research. The Nathan Hargrove case remains unique among documented examples of hidden activities in slave communities due to the unusual preservation of materials from multiple perspectives. The combination of Eleanor's letters, Crawford's logs, and various official records provides a level of documentation that is rare for events that participants actively tried to conceal. As research techniques and historical methodologies continue to develop, scholars periodically return to the case to see if new approaches might reveal additional insights or resolve some of the remaining questions. The richness of the available materials continues to support new interpretations and analyses decades after the original research was conducted. The broader historical context surrounding the case has also evolved, as scholars have developed more sophisticated understanding of slave communities, resistance networks, and the complex social dynamics of plantation systems. The Nathan Hargrove story fits into this expanded historical framework while retaining its distinctive characteristics and unresolved mysteries. For those who study the case today, the most compelling aspect often remains the human dimension of the story. Nathan's apparent decision to remain hidden rather than flee, Ruth's courage in maintaining dangerous secrets, and Eleanor's struggle to comprehend moral complexities all represent individual responses to impossible circumstances that continue to resonate with contemporary audiences. The question of what happened to Nathan after the hidden chambers were sealed and the unofficial records destroyed continues to generate speculation and research efforts. While definitive answers may never be available, the ongoing interest in his fate reflects the power of individual stories to illuminate broader historical experiences and continuing concerns about justice and recognition. The case ultimately stands as a reminder that even the most thoroughly documented historical events contain gaps and mysteries that reflect the limitations of any single perspective or source of information. The hidden activities at the Hargrove plantation were successful precisely because they remained concealed from those who might have documented them, ensuring that key aspects of the story would remain forever beyond definitive historical recovery. Yet the fragments that have survived provide sufficient evidence to establish that complex, organized, and sustained resistance activities occurred within a system designed to prevent exactly such possibilities. The Nathan Hargrove case demonstrates that enslaved communities possessed agency, intelligence, and organizational capabilities that plantation management systems consistently underestimated and failed to control completely. Today, nearly 2 centuries after the events occurred, the case continues to challenge assumptions about what was possible within slave systems and how thoroughly such systems controlled the lives of the people they held in bondage. The story suggests that many other similar cases of hidden resistance and concealed activities probably occurred, but left even fewer traces in the historical record. The Atlanta area, now a major metropolitan center, contains countless locations where similar dramas of concealment, resistance, and human dignity probably played out, without leaving documentary evidence for future researchers to discover. The Nathan Hargrove case represents not only a unique historical mystery, but also a window into a much larger pattern of human responses to dehumanizing circumstances. For visitors to modern Atlanta who know the story, the city's landscape takes on additional layers of meaning. Beneath the highways, office buildings, and residential developments lie the traces of a different world where people like Nathan and Ruth created spaces for dignity and resistance within circumstances designed to eliminate both. Their success in remaining hidden from official view for extended periods demonstrates both the limitations of systems of control and the persistence of human agency under even the most oppressive circumstances. The scratching sounds that Eleanor heard in the night, the careful records maintained in hidden chambers, and the network of communication that sustained dangerous secrets all represent forms of historical memory that official documentation failed to capture. These hidden activities created their own form of historical record, one that was nearly lost, but that fragments like the Nathan Hargrove case allow us to glimpse across the barriers of time and deliberate concealment.